have just completed listening to the speeches. There are thousands of people down here. They're all marching right now. And I have my guest host today with me, Pat Harris. We just concluded some interviews with some students. And I wanted to talk with Pat about his impressions about not only the interviews we just conducted, but his impressions of today. So why don't we start with the latter. What did you think of what you witnessed here today?
I think it was awe-inspiring. And I think what I got mostly out of this, more than anything, Lauren, it's not just gun control. That's the issue today. But they want to change politics. They want to change the system. They want to change what they see as a corrupt system, correctly see as a corrupt system. And this is a start. And I think what's amazing to me is I see generations, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, who a lot of people have become frustrated. A lot of people have become angry. And they sit at home and they throw things at the television and they complain. But they feel like they're helpless. There's just nothing they can do. What's amazing about what these people have done today and what we've seen today, they're not going to just sit there. They're not going to just allow this to continue as politics as usual. They're going to change something, and that to me is really awe-inspiring.
I was wondering specifically what you thought about the comments from the students from Black Lives Matter, because in the news yesterday there was an article about David Hogg from Parkland. He's been one of the more outspoken students from the Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School, and he said that one regret that he's had about the coverage is that more African Americans were not included. He said his school is 25% African American, but looking at the coverage, you would never know that because the white students have been privileged to be the spokespeople. And here we heard, you know, the African Americans from Black Lives Matter talk about how gun violence is a fact of their lives every day, has very little to do with school shootings. Do you want to address that?
I'm so glad you asked about that because Black Lives Matter and the gentleman you're talking about, David, they're dead on. We are talking about school shootings. That's obviously what's driven the conversation. What should have been driving the conversation for a number of years that's been largely ignored is what's going on in our black communities, where you see repeatedly young black men get unarmed, get gunned down by police officers. We saw it just this week in Sacramento. We saw a young man who was gunned down in his backyard, the police officer shot 20 times because supposedly he had a gun, which of course he didn't. He may or may not have had a cell phone. We don't even know that for sure. They found one nearby, but we don't know if that was in his hand or not. These people are living, these young black men are living every single day with the concept of they don't know if they're going to get pulled over, if it's going to result in an arrest, if it's going to result in, God forbid, a shooting. And I got to tell you, one of the most touching things that's happened to me in this campaign, I was giving a speech and I was talking about what I consider to be one of the major issues, which is income inequality and the whole issue of 99% versus 1%. I talked about some of the solutions. After I finished the talk, a young African-American woman came up to me. She was probably in her mid-30s. She said, I have a son who's 10 years old. I agree with a lot of what you're talking about. I agree with Medicare for all. I agree about income inequality. But it's hard for me to focus on these issues when I worry about whether my son's going to come home at night. That's what I have to focus on. That is so telling about what's going on in this community. When your concern isn't, you can't even talk about or be concerned about getting another job or getting a promotion. Your concern is my son coming home tonight? That is really an amazing thing.
Yes, and I know that last weekend at a fundraiser you made some incredible remarks about our district attorney, Jackie Lacey. Can you tell the viewers what your issue is with Jackie Lacey?
My issue is Jackie Lacey needs to resign. We elected district attorney to fight for us, to take on tough cases. We elected district attorney to also be a watchdog over the police. That's their role. What we've seen from Jackie Lacey and what we've seen from past district attorneys is their relationship with the police is so close, they refuse, and their contributions from the police unions, they refuse to go after police. We saw what was ultimately in the civil rights community. I'm a civil rights lawyer. We saw a case 2 years ago of a young black man shot in Venice, unarmed, videotaped, and with the amazing, absolutely amazing fact that the chief of police, LAPD, Charlie Beck, he came out and stated his own police officer ought to be prosecuted. That's never happened. That, to my knowledge, I've never even heard of that in the history of LAPD. Despite that, we found out last week that Jackie Lacey was refusing to prosecute the police officer. To me, and her reasoning was, it's too tough. It's just too tough. Well, we elect you to be tough. We elect you to take on the tough cases. I can get a first-year DA to take on a case of if you've got a bank robber who's confessed and has video, I can get a first-year DA to convict him. We need DAs who are going to be willing to take on tough cases. And I will tell you one thing. I actually talked to you about this the other night on the phone. In Minnesota, in Minneapolis, there was a police officer who was prosecuted. Just this week, the DA announced he was going to prosecute him for shooting a person. They were driving down the street or something, and somehow or another the police officer thought he was in danger and shot this person. And guess what? That person's being prosecuted in Minnesota. But here's the kicker, and he should be. But here's the kicker. The victim was a blonde white woman. Immediately, that was considered, okay, we can prosecute this case. That's not a tough case. The victim's a blonde white woman. When the victim's a young black man, suddenly it's too tough to prosecute. That's just dead wrong.
Yes, and there has not been a police prosecution of a killer cop in over 15 years in this city. Now, one of the reasons I've heard is that the district attorney needs the police officers to make her other cases. So by prosecuting cops, she's going to get a boycott of the police. They're not going to testify for her. And the second reason is the outsized contributions, again, money in politics, by the Police Protective League to the district attorney's campaign. So what kind of reforms do you think could be made in these two areas to address the situation?
Well, I think the second one you hit the nail on the head. It's the contributions. It's the money going to the district attorney for his or her reelection. You see that over and over in a number of different communities. The first one I disagree with, though. I hear that, but I disagree. I deal on a daily basis. I deal with police officers from the LAPD, sheriff's office, local police communities. These people are tired of being, they're hardworking. They don't want to shoot. They're not going out on the street looking for a confrontation. They feel like they do a good job. They feel like they're working hard. And when they see a rogue cop like this who just shoots and asks questions later, they want people to prosecute them. They want to be able to say, look, this is the bad apple. It's no different than if you were in any profession. If you've got, for example, let's take our good friend Charlie Rose. Most journalists, I think it's safe to say, are happy that he's been run out of the business as he should have been. They're happy about it because it makes the rest of the business look better. Same thing with cops. They want to see rogue cops prosecuted. This idea that they're going to boycott or whatever, that's baloney. But the police union is extremely powerful. It gives money. They raise money for the district attorney. They push. That's the problem. And what we've got to do is, in order to reform this, it goes back to, once again, everything we talk about in this campaign. We got to get corporate money out. If you look at Represent Us, the group that's fighting to get local ballot measures on, that's exactly what they can do, is to work on races like this to prevent groups like the police unions from giving an excess amount of money.
Okay, and you just used the word union. So it's not just corporate money, it's special interest money, and that can be unions too.
Absolutely correct.
Now you are talking about searching for a candidate to replace Jackie Lacey. And we have seen there's a group that is headed up by Sean King right now who is working on that very thing nationwide, finding district attorneys that are going to represent the people, not the law enforcement. And Larry Krasner is a good example of that kind of district attorney. He's been doing all sorts of wonderful reforms since he's gotten to be DA in Philadelphia. Do you want to talk about that?
I think that's the solution for us in Los Angeles. Larry Krasner was a civil rights and criminal defense attorney for his entire career. He announced he was going to run for district attorney, and everybody looked at him like he was crazy. He ran in Philadelphia on a platform of, look, we are going to make sure that people actually, real criminal justice reform, we're going to see that people get help. We're going to see that drug addicts, we're going to see that those with mental health issues, that instead of throwing them into jails and warehousing them, we're going to see that they actually get help. Larry Krasner was sort of he's been kind of a pioneer to that, but everybody looked at him like he was crazy. Well, flash forward a year later, he's now the district attorney of Philadelphia because that's what the people want. They are sick to death of these law and order, tough on crime, throw everybody in jail. If your skin is black, if your skin is brown, we're going to basically put you in jail for whatever we can. People are sick of that. And we're seeing a real revolution across the country. We're seeing in places like San Antonio. We're seeing it in cities like Dallas. We're seeing in California. We've got a young woman in Oakland running named Pamela Price, who is a defense attorney. We've got a young woman down in San Diego who's a public defender. She's running for DA. We have to find somebody in L.A. We have to find a criminal defense, civil rights attorney, someone who will fight to reform the system. We need to get a candidate who's willing to take on the special interest and take on Jackie Lacey.
I wanted to ask you the question that I was asking the young students, and I approached one of the speakers about, because he mentioned that he thought that Adam Lanza, who did the Sandy Hook shootings, and Nicholas Cruz, who did the Parkland shooting, were quote-unquote psychotic terrorists. And I went up to him and I said, you know, those boys had autism spectrum disorder. That is a disorder, that is not a psychosis. And what happens when you have those kind of disorders, you have very poor social skills, you're awkward, sometimes you say offensive things, you do funny things, weird things. And these students, both of them, were bullied, they were shunned, they were ridiculed. And as a result, they went into their the isolation of their rooms. They played violent video games. This guy I don't remember about Adam Lanza, but Nicholas Cruz certainly was in some right-wing group chat rooms. And this is, first of all, mental illness does not cause violence. Most of the violence is perpetrated against mentally ill people. But this is a disorder, and it could lead to these problems. What do you think should be done about this?
Well, I think your point is well taken. Violence isn't created in a vacuum. Rarely. There are rare situations where somebody who has mental health issues does become violent. But as you point out, it's not at all the norm. And generally when you find people who do commit these kind of crimes, you find that it is not the mentally ill or people with mental health issues. What you find is almost always that their environment they've grown up in, the things that have occurred to them in their life, that's what's created this feeling of helplessness, this feeling of, you have to think about it for a second. How much has to happen to you in your life to drive you to the point where you take a weapon and go kill other people? And if ever you look at these people, you look at these young men who have gone on the different rampages, Columbine, the different places, Aurora, Colorado. In almost every situation, you see people who have almost done exactly what you talked about. They've been in the environment you talked about. They've been bullied. They've been shunned. They have been, for the most part, they have had families who haven't noticed the signs, who haven't paid attention. And what happens is there's this feeling of absolute just despair, that there is nothing for them in life, that life presents no options, there's nothing positive they can see because they don't have anything positive in their lives. So the result is, let's just go ahead, I don't care, I'm going to go ahead and take other people's lives because I'm so angry. We have to recognize that, and I think what you're talking about is We have to have people in schools, not just in schools, in other areas of life as well, who recognize the signs and understand it's not a mental health issue. It's an issue of how these people are being treated in the environment they're growing up in. They've got to be watching for this. We've got to be on tune to this.
Yes. Now, a corollary to that is social media and regular media, because there's a lot of cyberbullying going on. In the regular media, they're giving a lot of attention to these killers. And some media outlets have said they're not going to say their names because they know that a lot of people want to be famous for doing this. You know, I think he even said, Nicholas Cruz, that he was going to shoot up a school. So how much do you think social media and mainstream media play into this phenomenon?
It's easy to blame the mainstream media, and it's easy for the mainstream media to be sort of the easy fallback to say they're responsible. And they get upset, and they start sort of fighting back. But the truth of the matter is the mainstream media does have a responsibility here. They are, in fact, responsible for a lot of what's going on. They have to recognize themselves that just because something gets a rating or gets people viewing it doesn't make it television that they should be showing. You know, if they really wanted to have tremendous ratings, we should go back to public executions. You know, we should go back to chopping people's heads off in the public square. That would get wonderful ratings. The media has to have a responsibility to recognize that, look, yeah, there are things that would get ratings, but they're also going to cause greater societal problems. We live in Los Angeles. I'm not sure the rest of the country sees this as much as we do, but pretty much on a weekly basis, you can turn on one of the stations in the day and see the police chase going on up and down the freeways, and they will cover that for hours. They will cover this, as opposed to actually going into a school and talking to the students we're talking to. In terms of interviewing people or finding out what real problems are, we're covering some silly chase that usually ends in somebody getting out of a car and getting arrested. They do have a responsibility. They have to recognize that. And as much as I know they take a lot of crap from Donald Trump and from the right wing and so forth, part of it's earned. Part of it is because they have failed to do their job.
Now, we've talked about mental illness, we've talked about the media. Let's talk about the real the real problem here, which is access to guns. I'm not even going to say specifically AR-15s, even though that is the gun of choice, because in reality, in our country, 60% of gun deaths are suicides by handguns. I personally feel that nobody should have guns. It should be like Australia, that even the cops don't have the guns. But we know we're going to never get that in this country because of the power of the NRA. And for the first time since I've been paying attention to this issue, we've seen the Parkland students have done such a great job because they are so good at social media and they're so articulate on the mainstream media that they are actually getting, I believe it's 20 companies now, to stop doing programs with the NRA. How do you think we can decrease the power? I mean, I know that you as a corporate-free candidate have pledged not to take money from the NRA or any other corporation. Aside from just on an individual candidate basis, what do you think we can do to decrease the power of the NRA in our country?
Well, you hit the nail on the head, which is we've got a number of things that we talk about, bump stocks, assault weapons, measures that would be incremental. But if we are going to be really serious about gun violence in this country, we have to cut the NRA off at the knees. And the NRA's bread and butter is its ability to help congressmen get reelected. That's how they have power. That's what they've grown in terms of 30 to 40 years. That's how they've exercised their power. We have to cut off the ability for them to buy congressmen and senators. It goes back to the very root of what this campaign is about, which is getting corporate money out of politics. But let me just say one thing, because the NRA, their ability to influence politicians is, a lot of people believe it's second to none, that they have the most powerful lobby in the country. What's amazing is this. They don't represent gun owners. The NRA is not a gun owner. It's not a gun owner organization. It's a gun manufacturer organization. That's who they represent. In actuality, even by their own numbers, which are, by the way, false, but they claim they have about 5 million members. That's less than 2% of the population of this country, okay? They're not representing gun owners. And that figure, $5 million, by the way, is blown way out of proportion. What they represent are gun manufacturers, and it's a hand-in-hand deal. The gun manufacturers want the legislation to be able to continue to do what they do. The NRA provides gets the money from the gun manufacturers, provides that to get congressmen elected, and the whole thing just keeps going in the same circle that we've always been going in. We have got to stop the cycle of corporate donations, and we've got to recognize groups like the NRA don't have power other than their corporate donations. They don't have the power of the people. That's been a fallacy from day one. They do not have, even you see NRA members that polled say that they in fact support banning assault weapons. They support certain measures. The NRA doesn't care. They don't care about their membership. They only care about one thing, and that's the gun manufacturers.
Now the final question is, there is a bill that is advancing through the California legislature. It actually just passed the Education Committee, and that is to have an armed officer in school. In California, as you know, 70% of our legislators are Democrats. So this could not have passed the Education Committee without support from Democrats. What do you think of this bill, and what do you think we can do to stop it?
There is such a cowboy mentality, and it's in the state legislature. This concept that somehow or another, it's said, well, the Republicans love to say this, that the way to stop a bad man with a gun is a good man with a gun. Well, the way to stop a bad man with a gun is a politician with a backbone. That's how you're going to stop him. We are in a situation where people actually believe, because they see in our day, obviously, John Wayne movies or Clint Eastwood movies, or now I guess The Rock, those type of action movies, where a person with a gun turns around, shoots, automatically shoots the bad guy, and it's very easy. It's very simple. That's not real life. I've actually been in a gun shooting. I was at El Al Airline on 4th of July, I believe it was 2004, when a gunman came in and started shooting. I was fortunate enough, in a weird sort of irony, they took what I had, and I wouldn't turn it over because I'm an attorney and it was attorney-client privilege. So they moved me behind a door to go through my luggage. So when the shooting started, I was behind a door about 3/4 closed. One of the bullets hit the doorknob or door lock where I was standing. I didn't see the gunman. What I did see was the ensuing panic among the people, including myself, because animal instinct is you run. You see danger, you run. We are, after all, animals, and that's what we do as with our instinct. Everybody started pouring through the doors. Several people had blood on them, and we all started running. The idea that somehow or another an actual gun confrontation is going to be where there's going to be an armed guard, there's going to be somebody with an assault weapon, people are going to be running crazy, running around, and this armed guard is going to calmly stand there, know who the shooter is, take his shot, and kill him calmly while the gunman, by the way, just stands there, is ridiculous. It's not how it happens. I've seen it up close. I've seen the panic. I know what it's like. That's not reality. And for them to think that this is going to cure the problem is not only going to not cure the problem, it's going to add to it. We absolutely need fewer guns, not more.
Okay, I know you want to go join the marchers, so is there anything more on this subject you want to say before we conclude the program?
I only want to say this. What we've talked about a little bit today, and what we've been talking about overall is this. We have to recognize that this issue, it's an important issue, but it's the tip of the iceberg in terms of politics. All these things, whether it be gun control, whether it be Medicare for all, whether it be climate change. It all starts with getting corporate money out of politics. It all starts with, in this particular case, cutting off the NRA at the knees. It all starts with cutting off the Koch brothers in terms of things like climate change. It goes to cutting off the insurance company when it comes to Medicare for all. We have to recognize that if we're going to have real change, and what I love is everybody we've interviewed, Lauren, and all these people are here, they're not willing to let politics be the same. We've got to stand hand in hand with them and say, we aren't going to allow it to be the same. We are going to change it by getting money out of politics. That's the solution. That's the only way we're going to get real change. We love to talk about change. Real change is only going to come when we get corporate money out.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you for being here with me to help me co-host my show today. I'm going to be wrapping it up here in my coverage from the March for Our Lives Los Angeles, here in downtown Los Angeles. This has been Lauren Steiner for the Robust Opposition. Keep fighting.